Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Maker That Money, the podcast where we talk about turning your hobby into your jobby. I am Pooch of Repkord. With me today, as always, Mr. Andrew Mayhall of 3D Gloop. How are you, my good friend?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm lovely. And in the hot seat today, we've got Mr. Thomas Williams, aka Mimetics3D. Thomas, welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're having a lovely day.
It's great.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Y'all have such a great, welcoming environment. So I'm stoked.
We try. Shout out to everybody in the chat. I see a lot of familiar faces in there. Some new ones. Oh, Nomi's in there. Good to see you. Good to see a hedgehog. Karen Chow Designs. I hope you are doing well. Mike at Never Let the Machines Win. Additive Adam. Grant at 3D Musketeers. And my super good friend, Mr. Steve Builds. You may know him from the Voron Project leadership team, and also just an excellent dude, fellow lover of tacos. Good to see you. Courtney from Filament Stories, hi to you as well. Man, you guys, I am excited. Thomas, we've been talking about having you on since RMURF. That's the Rocky Mountain Rep Festival, for those who don't speak acronym.
A while back, yeah. Time flies.
And I know that you've been traveling a bunch. We've been traveling a bunch, a lot going on, but I'm so glad we finally got you here. And why don't you tell everyone that might not know about you, like who you are, what Mimetics is, the elevator pitch when people, want to know about you. What do you got?
Okay, sure. I'm Thomas Williams. My online 3D modeling thing is Mimetics3D. Mimetics as in like biomimetics, like biomimicry. So the original idea was that I would make things kind of mimicking animals from nature. I've kind of deviated from that quite a bit, but I do want to get back to that at some point.
That's clever.
The thing, I think one of the first models I released that turned out pretty well, largely because Courtney from Filament Stories really posted some great content about it, was a little articulated Snapflex. So Snapflex is the joint that I designed here that is a locking articulated model joint.
Yeah.
So it's a flexi that you can kind of pose.
I don't think I realized that was your innovation, because I've seen that now on a couple things, and I mean, it's brilliant, right? We've seen the flexibles, but you came up with the locking mechanism for the neck, huh? We're crediting Thomas. Good.
There are a few different. I'm sure people have come up with their own versions of it. I hadn't seen it anywhere else prior to a year ago when I released my versions of it. And I've seen one or two things that seem largely inspired, but
sure,
it's essentially an articulation with a clip on the inside. But I really want to do more models that combine the doing something fun and organic with moving in an interesting way. Okay. That's really the thing that inspires me.
Nice. Look, this is great. I don't even have to ask the questions. He's already handled where did Mimetics come from, like what inspires. No, this is fantastic.
We're not needed.
No. AI is going to replace this pretty soon anyway. So, in fact, you guys might not have known this, but Andrew has been in AI for years. He's just very advanced. Very advanced. Yeah, the Snapflex. We got Liz in the chat, says she loves the Snapflex, best fidget. She's also printing your new baby amethyst dragon right now, so that's awesome. I think it's fair to say that your designs have gotten out there and have probably gotten to be so abundant that it's probably people may not even realize they're yours. But what you've done, like I said, I didn't even realize that snap innovation. Joel was showing off one of your dragons the other day and did the neck lock thing, and I'm like, that's actually really, really smart, given how many people love the articulation, but then want to be able to pose it and stuff like that. And so really cool little innovations that I love seeing. Fantastic. Well, I know that there are a lot of people out there that are probably eager to dive in on the discussion of what it takes to build a following, a design, a career as a 3D designer and stuff. And we will get into that. But before we do, we have to do our weekly segment that I often forget, but hate it when I do. Our wins of the week. And for those listening along at home that are in the chat, I would love for you guys to share a win in the chat as well, because we like to start the show off with a positive vibe, feel. Andrew, you're going to be first, as always, because I love to put you on the spot. And it's just something great that's happened to you this week. It can be personal. It can be about business. What do you got for us, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I think I'll go with something that it at first was not positive, but I think I turned it into a positive light.
Oh, that's good.
We're constantly growing over here. Things are absolutely insane at the Gloop headquarters. And unfortunately got some bad news earlier in the week that a particular thing that I've been working on basically wasn't going to go forward anymore on one specific avenue. And it was pretty depressing. But at the same time, I think what it allowed me to do is take a step back and realize, well, wait a second, that way probably wasn't the best way anyways. Turn that around and found, I think, a better path. So sometimes I think we all need to take steps back and kind of reevaluate where we are and see maybe there's an easier path. As we are going on in our adventures, sometimes we think we're on the right path and that this is the only way up. But turns out there's probably at least another way or two. So
that's really well said. And I think that resonates with me in a lot of aspects of my life, that, change comes as a very uncomfortable thing to people in general. Like, we like the comfort of familiarity, but the truth is, were it not for the bad things, the discomfort, or what feels bad at the time, like, it wouldn't create progress, whether it's finding a new job or a new partner or whatever thing that it was. And then ultimately, hopefully you reflect and you got to a better place. And I can think of so many examples of that in both my personal and my professional life. So good for you for recognizing that, admitting it. And, there's always, as we like to say, there's no one right or wrong way to go about this. We don't claim to have any of our stuff figured out.
Oh, God,
we just
no.
know what's allowed us to keep going thus far. Your mileage may vary, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Thomas, you're up. What's your win this week?
Win of the week. It's kind of a carryover from last week. Previous week, I went to Gen Con, which is a big board game convention. It's North America's largest board game convention.
Wow.
It's actually where I first got... I first realized that 3D printing had become so much more accessible. Was I saw people selling 3D printed like dice towers and dragons and stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, this is something I can have in my home now.
Right.
But I went, and it's a great opportunity to get out there and chat with board game designers and 3D modelers and artists and all sorts of people who are just really passionate to be at an event for something that they care about. So I went to that, chatted with a lot of great people, made great connections, showed off the latest collab that I did with Felicia Day. A lot of people loved that. And then this week, I think the high is just internalizing a lot of the learnings I got there, and resting and just kind of having all of that experience solidify an interesting way. Nice. So it's kind of a carryover from that, but I'm really, while it was stressful at the time, I'm really glad I went.
Good.
That's awesome.
Good. Mine, I've been just using the week to just kind of check off some really like long-standing deferred maintenance kind of things, like getting the books back in order, like just really checking off stuff on the to-do list that have kind of grown, some moss on them over the last couple months, which is kind of a pattern I fall into when I go into, like, I do a bunch of travel and then I come back and then I'll kind of, so it feels disjointed at the time, but it seems to work for me. So I'm happy I'm getting some stuff checked off. not super exciting, just little things like fix the broken drawer, but a lot of volume, right? Like little things, but volume. And so sometimes
There
I
you
need
go.
that. And sometimes I need, the big heckin' just stressful thing that I've been putting off forever and checking that off. And when I finish my taxes, which I've filed an extension on, like that'll be that one. So I'm still chipping away at that too. But, the tax stuff is always interesting because it's like, that the amount of time you spend going through and making sure you have everything right will have pretty significant implications on how much you're paying or not paying. And so I'm always really, really overly cautious about when I'm ready to pull the trigger on actually submitting that. And it gets reviewed by the accountant and all that stuff too. But I would say, I don't know what your experience with accountants has been, Andrew, but like they're not super proactive. Like they might point out a thing here or there to look at, but for the most part, they kind of ride whatever wave you're sending their way, it seems. I don't know.
I mean, I think it depends on the accountant.
That's true.
I have got some incredible accountants now. That being said, I also pay them a lot of money, and it's very frustrating sometimes to pay that bill.
I think that's my point, right? It's like for the amount of money you're paying, you would hope that there's more proactiveness, but
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's one of those taxes are some of the most brutal things to deal with.
Yeah. I'm already getting trolled in the chat for not letting you guys talk enough. So I'm just going to be quiet now. Andrew, you do a couple interview questions and I'm going to sit here and drink my iced coffee.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess just kind of dive right in. Tom, how long have you been kind of doing this 3D modeling, kind of making, your own way, if you will?
So I'm not good with time. I think it's actually less than a year now.
Oh, wow.
So it started last September. It was actually at the board game convention last year.
Where is that, by the way? Where is that?
So it's in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay.
Okay.
It's Gen Con. It takes place usually around August. Has 60 to 80,000 attendees each year. So
big.
like a lot of people there to play board games and tabletop games and D&D and cosplay and all sorts of fun stuff.
Wow.
But it's a really, really interesting microcosm that just kind of takes over downtown Indianapolis for 5 days. But it was at that last year that I'd been playing around with modeling. I had downloaded Blender like a year before. I have an engineering background, so I had used SolidWorks and Fusion 360 and all that more parametric software. But in like 2022, I had downloaded Blender and started playing around with sculpting and geometry nodes and trying to find an interesting intersection between sculpting and procedural, like parametric modeling. And it was last year at the gaming convention that I was chatting with some vendors that were selling prints and hearing about their experiences. And I was like, I really enjoy going to these events and chatting with vendors and people who are like making things and making toys or making games or just enjoying being in that environment. And one of them mentioned something about some designers that they followed on Thangs. And I had been on Thangs, but I hadn't had a membership yet. So I was like, all right, you know what? Why not? Let's go for it. Let's throw some models together. I had started the Snapflex joint about a year prior, just as like a fun like project for myself, like an experiment. And I was like, all right, I'm going to throw it in something and post it and see what happens. And then within the like next month was Earth, now 3D Printopia, where I had the second design that I had put out with the joint in it, and then ran into Liz, and then Liz introduced me to so many people, including Courtney, and then it just kind of like exploded from there.
Awesome.
So it was a little bit of a little overwhelming, but like a great learning experience at the same time.
Yeah,
there's still a lot of growing pains and still a lot of things that I thought I would be working on that I haven't been working on. Things that I didn't think I would be doing more of that I'm doing more of. So it's about finding that right balance.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's all about the journey and the learnings you make along the way. So I'm having a great time.
Would you say Blender is your go-to CAD package right now?
So right now, I had started out doing designs in Fusion 360, dropping them into Blender to sculpt around.
Okay.
Because I could do everything kind of parametric in Fusion 360, well
Right.
parameterized, and then tweak things as necessary. But what that turned into was, all right, it takes me a while to sketch things up in Fusion 360 and like name all my variables and parameters and stuff.
Yeah.
And usually I'm iterating so fast on the other stuff that I just need to be able to smash primitives together faster and move stuff around.
I like that.
So right now I'll largely spend a lot of time in Blender moving basic shapes around, and if I want to solidify it like with really high precision, I'll take that design and I'll just recreate it in Fusion 360.
Wow.
Okay.
And if I don't need to do that, then I'll just keep it in Blender, tweak it, clean it up, have like higher resolution geometry where I need it, and lower resolution stuff where I don't. I make myself a lot of like tools in geometry nodes, which is kind of like, do you know anything about it?
I've only just what I've seen. There's another guy that's on, I think, Instagram that's always talking about geometry nodes, where he's made a lot of stuff where it's like, different pipe fitting clamps and stuff. Like
No Dojo.
Yeah,
right?
No Joe. Yeah, I love that guy.
Taro,
Right.
Joe Bowers. I think.
Yeah.
His stuff is great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So
you have tools like that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So mine are less. I'm not making a bolt generator or something.
Right.
But I'm making generators or tools that allow me to have a slightly more procedural parametric workflow in Blender. Or I'll sculpt something, and if I want to plan out particular motion paths, I'll be able to say like, all right, I sculpted this piece here and this piece here and this piece here, and then I'm going to instance them all somewhere else with geometry nodes and have them move along particular paths. So I can, in a way, simulate how a thing would move without having to print it out and move it around a bunch of times.
That's really neat. Yeah.
It is largely hacked together, but it's whatever gets the job done. And it's fun making the tools. So
you're no different from any coder or programmer in that regard, where it's like nobody wants any other coder to see their code, because it's all just we're all just it's all held together with band-aids and bubble gum and all that stuff too. But at the end of the day, like you said, if it works and it works for you, that's good. And then you can refactor as you have time. But the end of the day, it's like we'd rather produce more content than probably work on the optimal way there. But it's a process. So. Okay, so this is interesting. So you finding yourself existing in between the parametric world and the Blender world and all this other stuff. Have you been tempted to want to try other tool sets? ZBrush, like more organics, like, or is that just going to be too much of a distraction to your workflow right now?
That's kind of what I settled on. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, I would love to get into ZBrush so I can do higher detail sculpts, and I'd love to get I only have FDM printers right now. I don't have resin.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, all right, as soon as I download ZBrush and pay for it, I'm gonna sink all my time into that. And then as soon as I get a resin printer, I'm gonna sink all my time into that, and I'm not gonna actually produce anything. I'm just gonna go down tons and tons of different rabbit holes.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great time.
Yeah.
But it's not going to actually ship anything.
Right.
And I have enough rabbit holes to go down as is with my current tool set. So they are things I want to get into and learn more about, but those are later on in the roadmap. Once I've found a little bit more of a steady state for my processes.
You said you've only been doing this for a year, but I mean, to see that you've got kind of a process and a workflow kind of ironed out is really neat. So could you kind of talk to like when did you start like realizing that you needed to develop that, or was that just something you fell into?
That's a great
so my background, I have an undergrad in biomedical engineering, a master's in mechanical engineering, and I used to work in doing Lean Six Sigma process improvement for a healthcare system. So I had like process beaten into me while working that
Yep.
career. Where I'm like,
Sure.
all right, everything has to like standardized, well documented processes. Everything has to scale because I was working in an environment where you're kind of already at a steady state. And at that point, any improvements are
Mhm.
to smooth out and find efficiencies within that steady state
Sure.
instead of completely redesign and like be more agile and do things on the fly.
Mhm.
So whenever I'm going into a new thing, my default is like, all right, how do I make this scale? Like, how do I make tooling? So if I want to make this thing 1,000 times, so I start
Mhm.
working on the tooling first, which isn't when you're just starting out with MVP, isn't
Yep.
necessarily the best first step because really you just
Sure.
need to make the thing, do stuff that doesn't scale at the beginning,
Mhm.
and then find what
Mhm.
works and then worry about scaling it later.
Yep.
So I do find myself spending way too much time being like, oh, I want to make this tool. And then I come up with this like giant geometry node setup to generate something. And then I'm like, all right, well, I made that 6 months ago. I haven't actually used it.
Mhm.
So I need to find the right balance there.
You know, I feel really conflicted around that because we've talked about MVP a lot on this, and I think, but we've also talked about the importance of having a plan in place.
Mhm.
Um, and so I keep going back and forth because I really respect that when you're looking to do something, you know, for the long haul, that you want to invest in setting up the system so that you can be successful over time. I think that that's totally important. But if we're being pragmatic too, it's like if you need cash flow to keep the thing going, if you're not producing sellable product, you know, in your case, models that are out there that give value to your members and whatnot, then you know you're not gonna have that lifeblood you need to keep things running too, right? So how do we strike a balance between the two, and maybe better asked, like, what has been your process for deciding what's good enough for now, knowing that you're going to keep investing that?
Um,
That's
that's
a
a
heavy
fantastic
questions there,
question.
right? Yeah.
How do I know when it's good enough? I don't think I've quite dialed in my radar for that yet. I think I have a tendency to over complicate and over engineer certain parts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I get to a point where I'm like, all right, I over engineered this thing. Now I need to slap a layer of paint on it, and then ship it. The difficulty, I think the if I'm working on something that's mainly like non-moving, like
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have moving parts,
Mm-hmm.
isn't functional,
Mm-hmm.
just needs to look a certain way, that's a lot easier to be like, all right, good enough,
Mm-hmm.
send it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something that moves in a new way, or if it's something where I have to test tolerances, or if it has to snap together,
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel comfortable shipping that without that working.
Oh, of course not. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's like the thing has to work. In any deliverable, there are parts that are like core MVP need to be there in order to ship. No questions about that.
Right.
And then there's other stuff that's like, all right, what's the nice to have?
Right.
And it's about figuring out, all right, where can I cut off the nice to have and say the core functional part's good enough.
Yeah.
And that varies from project to project. The latest one I did, it the latest collab with Felicia Day is probably the longest time I've spent working on a model,
Mm-hmm.
just because it had a lot of moving parts. The aesthetic stuff I did in like maybe 2 to 4 hours at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the project. I was like, all right, it needs to look like this, and I want it to move a certain way.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
getting it to move that way took
Just,
like
just so long.
way longer. Because it yeah.
Because the
Uh,
iterative process for that too. I'm assuming you have a theory, you do a design, and yeah, you've said you had some tools so you can kind of get a digital preview of it, but until you actually print it out and have it in your hands and feel how it locks and all that stuff. And so the bottleneck to your process then sounds like print speed. Is that fair?
Print speed is one of them. Print speed and how quickly I can iterate on the design.
Mm.
I did like I've gotten more printers just so I can prototype faster, which has helped a ton. But I've got so the for reference, the latest model, the latest collab with Felicia is this little I don't
Yeah, the
so it's a chest. It's a like
Yeah.
little mimic chest, and it's like lockable. It actually prints unfolded in place without supports on the build plate. So it's like, all right, I want it to print in place, no supports, needs to fold together, things need to click together, and then it needs to move in a certain way after that.
Yeah.
So I've got like a graveyard of mimics
Oh,
over in the corner of my room where it's like, all right, here's the top, here's the bottom, here's like the tongue,
yeah.
and 12 different like positions of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the bottleneck there is how quickly I could print it and test it and move it around.
Do you think that the concept of good enough is particularly hard for designers, where you feel like, you know, so much of who you are and your reputation and your skill is represented by what you're putting out there, and that if it didn't operate just as optimally as you have in your mind, that's not, you know, the imposter syndrome filters in?
A bit, I
Yeah.
think so. I think that varies from designer to designer. Like,
I'm sure it does.
I'm
I'm curious for your take on it though.
I'm relatively new to this world. Like I said, I've only been
Yeah.
like putting models out there for about a year. I guess prior to Fangs, I had dropped like one model on Colts.
Mm-hmm.
Not last December, but the previous December. Just one, and it laid out there, and then I didn't do anything for a
Yeah.
while. The I think for me, it's less about the reputation and more about just producing the quality thing. It's more of
Mm-hmm.
like an internal, like I don't, I if I'm making a thing, it needs to meet a certain standard. Um, so it's less about how I'm being viewed and more about doing a good job at the thing.
Hmm.
And I'm sure I need to recalibrate that a bit because at the end of the day, you are making things for other people. You're not necessarily making the things for yourself.
Right.
People aren't paying you to make things for yourself. They're paying you to make things for them.
Yeah.
Um, so it's about finding the appropriate balance of like, all right, what quality am I comfortable with that still meets user needs without me completely selling out and copying just rote copying other people's stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
also without being too snobby or proud about it. Like
Yeah.
it's a really weird balance to strike.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I don't get snobby and proud from you at all. I think people that know you and stuff, you know, would say that. But you know, this is interesting. Really quick to back up a second. You mentioned you've only done this a year. You mentioned your background. Are you doing this full time now? Are you still doing this like part time? Where are you at in terms of making a living on it?
so right now I'm splitting my time between this and I do like kind of freelance consulting work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I largely it's the simplest way to put it. I do like freelance data analytics sort of stuff. I streamline reporting processes.
Oh, the
Um,
really sexy stuff. Okay.
yeah, really sexy
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
You know how most businesses have a like linchpin of a few Excel workbooks
Yes.
that someone has been working in, and that they're mission critical.
Yeah.
And then sometimes in the business, someone leaves, and then no
Yes.
one knows how to use it.
They're like,
I'm the person who gets called in to be like, "All right, we've got these 6 workbooks. They're all connected. We don't know what they do.
right. And you
Help."
have to dig.
Um, and
Yeah.
I dig through and I kind of trace all the logic and I try to streamline it, document it, hand it back to them. I can do other stuff, but there's so much need for people to come fix broken spreadsheets that just takes up a disproportionate amount of time.
I did a ton of that back in my web development days, like with data, same thing with databases, like that sleuthing. And while it's like crazy, that's a really interesting niche to be in, because like you said, like so much institutional knowledge gets wrapped up in like a few people that have just done it a certain way. Never asking like, is a spreadsheet even the best tool for it? Right. It's just like, same thing that we talked about earlier. It's just like, well, it's sufficient and it's gotten us this far, but you run into these hit by a bus situations or retirement situations. And, you know, when the person's out, like they don't want to be constantly answering questions on this. It's like, yeah, here you go. Here's my stuff. I'm out. So I think you could be well employed for a long time with a gig like that. But you still do that. Is that a function of, because you're just like, you want to hedge, like it's just you don't want to necessarily put all your eggs in one basket. The income isn't as sustainable and as you would hope on the design front, so it's a hedge. What's the decision process there?
So, I mean, I do have clients with projects that I like maintain and support and come back and help them with things.
Yeah.
And it's not all explicitly the type of stuff I just mentioned. Like there are offshoots and different versions of and more complex things. But so there's a certain degree of like, all right, I have this relationship. I'm working on this thing. It would be a lot of time for them to find someone else to do it. And I can still do the work and still get paid for it.
Yeah.
And it gives me more time to do with the 3D modeling work what I would consider more R&D, where I can experiment more, because I have this other thing that pays pretty well per out, like at an hourly basis. Yeah, pays the bills. So I have the freedom to experiment more with the models that I'm making. Whereas if I completely dropped that, I would have to just churn.
You would churn more. Yeah.
Just like churn stuff that I probably care about less.
Yeah.
That would get views, that would be like very Instagrammable or TikTokable or whatever, and just push more stuff out there, because that would grow the Mimetics3D business faster. But I'm trying to find the right balance of growing that versus growing the underlying skill set and infrastructure for it, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does.
Because I don't want to kind of over optimize into making stuff I don't care about and then getting stuck making stuff I don't care about. At that point, it's just another day job. So I'm trying to find the right balance there.
Sure.
And it's difficult.
I can appreciate that, because I had clients for years and years, even after I stopped taking on new clients. You know, I'm a people pleaser, so I don't like saying no to people, and you know, the money was good, but like ultimately I wasn't super passionate about it. But it allowed me, like I said, the same way as you, to exist in both spaces, like have good income, feel less pressured to push one thing over another. I think it's a very common thread with a lot of the makers that we talk to here, whether you're a content creator, whether you're a product person, that oftentimes we almost stumble into the new occupation. It was like, oh, I guess I could do this. Like, this is viable. Yeah. So how does that feel? Like, do you see a path? Like, do you feel like if you decided that you're just like, you know what, I'm done with this other stuff, like I could make a living and like I can do this. It might not feel as comfortable, but we've seen this grow as a job opportunity. And I've had conversations with Dennis at things about the creator economy that's been made around this, and you've seen it firsthand.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, it sounds like your answer to that, you could do that if you wanted to. And we see people making quite good money, honestly, doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That, you know, the big thing that I keep pushing on Dennis and others, you know, like it, and you know, Things is just one of many platforms. You mentioned Cults. Thingiverse has been around for a long time. Like, it's not new to be a 3D modeler, but a lot of the monetization around it and the expectation of that has changed where it's like now no people are actually like started like memberships have become
Mhm.
really big, right? And paid models have been around as well, but I think people are more comfortable with the idea of like paying for good quality models now, right? And so
Mhm.
that's created a great little economy for people to have a career and all this other stuff. Um, what I guess my first question is, what made you gravitate toward Thangs as a platform for this? Well, let's start with that.
Okay. I think one, like all of even before I made an account on Thangs,
Mm-hmm.
I think I heard about it, or I think I had been searching for like 3D model contests or
Mm-hmm.
something before I had even like a few months after downloading Blender. I was like, all right, are there any contests I can make stuff and enter it? And I saw that Fangs had some, and then I started to do research, and I saw interviews
Mm-hmm.
that Dennis had done with or people interviewing Dennis, and then I did more research into them. I was like, oh, these seem like cool people.
Yeah.
Like this seems like a really just good, positive, uplifting, like good intent for the company. They want to build out a platform, like a very robust platform that
Mm-hmm.
allows designers to host their models.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really focused on giving designers the tools that they want and need. Um, and then seeing that evolve into, all right, we also want to give designers the ability to easily monetize
Mm-hmm.
and make a living of their art or their design or whatever they want to do making these 3D assets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think as soon as I started watching interviews, I was sold on the platform. And then once I started using it, I was like, all right, this takes a lot of the hassle out of, like, I don't have to have a Patreon and a cults and
Right.
then have a drive folder and then a My Mini Factory, so I can have this folder in My Mini Factory and then push all my patrons over to that. Things just has that easily, like, easy workflow once you go in and know how to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and they're super responsive. I don't know. It's just like it's a good community. It's good vibes.
Yeah.
And it makes it easy because they keep rolling out more and more great functionality that helps designers do what they want to do. Um,
And honestly, you know, one of the reasons I gravitate and love talking to Dennis is like he's just like this amazing cheerleader for the new, you know, the economy, and I do genuinely believe that their focus is in in creating just better tools so that people like you can make an honest living out of this. And you know, some of the numbers are just like mind blowing when you look at like the top, you know,
yeah.
contributors on there and how much money that they're making. And you know, just their effort to set up win-wins, where it's
Mhm.
like, look, we understand we're a business and we need to make money in this too, but there's enough to go around.
Yep.
And how bullish they are on the space in general,
Mhm.
that there's just so many people entering 3D printing, 3D modeling, and stuff on a daily basis that, you know, the notion of, you know, rising tide lifts all benches, and there is just so much opportunity for everyone. There's plenty of money to go around, and you know, so that's good. I mean, I think that they're outwardly saying the right things. It sounds like you as a designer feel well supported, and they give you the tools and are continually enhancing that. So that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I have an account. I haven't really used the platform a whole lot. I haven't dug around. I know that they're every time I go on there, it looks a little bit different. I know they've set up like the leaderboards and
Mhm.
all kinds of interesting little ways. I know that they have in-house, um, you know, creator support and doing, you know, their own social medias and going to events. And so it's like all the right things of being like good stewards of the community.
Yep.
Would you agree with that? And you
Oh
know,
yeah.
yeah, okay,
I would hands down agree. I think one thing that strikes me that I don't always think about, but I realize it every so often is that they are a like a VC backed company,
they are.
and
Yes.
usually that translates in, not usually, but you see other companies that have that pressure from investors,
Mm-hmm.
um, usually results in decisions that might not be best for the users. But the fact that Thangs is continually like holding the line,
Mm-hmm.
and doing things that are honestly like exceed expectations, I think really resonates with me as like, all right, they're putting in the effort, to really advocate for their users as opposed to just chasing the money wherever. They're playing the long, like they're playing an
Playing the
infinite
long
game. They're not
game.
they're,
Yeah.
they're not playing like a short term. All right, we just need to get to the thing. Like, of course, they have they're doing the work necessary to get to the next step each way, but
Yeah.
they're keeping the end goal in mind,
Yeah.
um, which is fantastic. I do think as I chat with more uh, like vendors and people at markets who sell prints
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
designers who are like 2D artists or 3D artists on other platforms, I'm realizing more and more that a lot of the things on things, just like the user interface and workflow, I just kind of it since it was pretty much the first thing I got used to, I'm used to it.
Yeah.
Um, so I could see where there might be a little bit of a learning curve for others, but I think that Thanks is doing a good job at smoothing that out and
Yeah.
getting more user feedback over time.
I mean, that's good to hear because I will say, as somebody that's built, UI and UX and stuff like that, it didn't originally felt a bit clunkier or maybe less intuitive. And I've heard that feedback from others too. I think that, everyone's got different opinions on what's ideal, and there's no perfect setup. I think people have different expectations. But, when something's born of, more of an engineering type application, sometimes it takes a while to get that Chrome right, get that experience right. Um, Side question for you, but related. Do you have your models up on other platforms as well?
Not no. So I had
You
originally
mentioned
started
Colts.
posting on Colts,
Yeah, yeah.
but I haven't really posted there in a very long time.
And would you say
Basically, I was
that's? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
um, basically it doesn't seem like the juice is worth the squeeze at this point
Mm-hmm.
to post to other places, just because everything I need
Yeah,
is on things right now.
yeah.
And there's no real reason. The only reason I would see to do it would be just to increase, like, as a marketing thing,
Mm-hmm.
just to get more visibility, like increase the size of the funnel.
Sure.
But I think Fangs is uh, I'm pretty much exclusive to Fangs at this point.
But that's your choice, or I don't know if you can comment. Is it a contractual thing, or is it just like a ease of
Oh, that's
management
that's
thing?
just what I've been doing so far.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think that's important to hear because I've talked to a number of designers that have kind of gone back and forth on a strategy for that, right? Because they go, well, let's get out in front of as many audiences as we can, but then it becomes an administrative nightmare to manage all those systems, and it's like, oh wait, I got to post. If I do an update, I got to update it on 10 different platforms. So I think it's interesting to try to come up. I mean, it's smart, obviously, for them to invest in creating tools that make your life easier, managing stuff like. And you could probably better comment to this, but it's like, look, if you have to do a bunch of uploads rather than like one at a time, like have a bulk uploader or other, features. So are you able to provide feedback to them, and have they been receptive in terms of like implementing new tools that make it just easier for you to want to stay there?
oh yeah, definitely.
That's good. Good.
I think that I generally don't have a ton of critical feedback, just because can navigate it pretty easily. There's of course like little things here or there. Um, I personally don't have to give a lot of feedback on, like, oh yeah, this particular widget doesn't function quite how I would want it to,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're going fast, you just kind of like
Yeah.
you fill in the gaps where you need to.
Right.
But like being on the Fangs Discord and seeing the feedback that they get there and how they respond to it, they do have a really good like learning loop
Mm.
built into there to respond and iron things out, which is fantastic.
I mean, that's really
I'm
good to hear because I think it's really easy to be critical when you feel that it's like things aren't being heard, but we provide a lot more grace and patience to companies that are receptive, and so I think that's a big piece of feedback that a lot of companies miss, that investing in making sure that you're hearing and showing that you're hearing and implementing those things where you can. I mean, it's always a juggling act, right? Because what's useful to you might not be useful to other designers in the same way. But investing in that does wonders in terms of people, like I said, being patient and giving you, like, not being as critical as a setup. Like, I'm sure there's still dozens of things that you wish were a little bit better, but you're not going to be, it's not in your interest to be complaining about it because you can see that they're making progress. So,
Yeah. And largely it's, like I said, because it's one of the, I had posted like 2 things to Colts before I'd started using things.
Yeah.
So when I started using it, I was just like, all right, this is just the way it is. And I think that's where a lot of the barrier to entry exists, is people just being used to the other platform, that they do stuff on the other platform. And then this one just doesn't function exactly the same way.
Sure.
Whereas if you came into it fresh
with no expectation,
with no expectation, it'd probably be a lot easier. But and that's true of anything.
Absolutely. Programmers always have their language of choice, and they want to argue to the ends of the earth. Java or Perl or whatever. I'm throwing out antiquated stuff now. Python, is the best, and it's like, no. Most of the time, that's based in like, this is what they know. That's what they're comfortable with. And honestly, it's arguably, if it's the right tool for you, it's not worth it your time to have to relearn something new to even make a proper evaluation of like what the best thing is.
And I think one thing that they're doing is that because of how much they're responding to that feedback, and how much they're trying to support designers, they're making it increasingly worth the time to go in and try it out and invest.
Interesting. That's good.
So they're doing a really good job at aligning incentives to make sure that what is in their best interest is the stuff that's in the best interest of the designers and the users.
Let's shift gears for a second, because we got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes left. I want to be respectful of your time here too. We almost always go long.
I'm good for whatever. Yep.
Yeah, but trying desperately to stay within the bounds, even though we fail miserably all the time. I want to talk about the S word, and it comes up often here. It's something I'm very passionate about, and that's sustainability. So if you've been following along at home for a long period of time, you'll hear me drop that word a lot. And I think it's underrated in the business world, because we, especially in the West and in the States, we subscribe to hustle culture, VC, just like getting it out there, doing like go without really even stopping to analyze like where we're going and if it's healthy and if it's sustainable. So sustainable can mean a number of things in business, right? It can be, is this like mentally and emotionally, sustainable? Like, do I have the energy to just like keep moving at this pace? But my bigger question around, what we're seeing here with Things and other platforms, Colts, Printables, etc., is, are we in a gold rush right now of, more people are entering the space like every day. It's 3D printing is still new. Like, I meet people every day, even after being in the industry for almost a decade now, that have never even seen 3D printing before, that are buying a machine. Are we, are people like you able to have this amazing opportunity because you're kind of one of the first actors in the space? Is this really a career path that somebody should invest in long term? Because the more people that get into it, is it a zero-sum game as well, as more and more people get into it?
So I think yes and no. I think, of course, it is a little bit of a gold rush.
Yep.
In some senses, but I think the pie is also expanding. And everyone is going to be able to find if everyone is producing exactly the same thing, then all right, you're going to crowd each other out. But because the world is expanding and the need for 3D print, like 3D printing is more accessible. You can print something that's entirely functional. You can print a mini, you can print a toy, you can print anything in between, something for your car. There's going to be like the number of niches that are profitable, and the profitability of those niches is going to grow over time. And some stuff will get crowded out, but other stuff you'll just maybe need to get a little bit more specific.
Sure.
within your niche. So I do think like the Cinder Wings and Flexi Factories
Mhm.
and Matt Meyer Makes, they hit it early with the toys.
Mhm.
So they're doing fantastic.
Mhm.
Also, like they do fantastic jobs.
Yeah,
They've
yeah, yeah.
kind of like set the bar and led the way for a lot of the folks who are coming in now and designing other stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and they're of course doing great. But you can also see that the types of models that people are purchasing and subscribing for is getting broader and diversifying. You've
Mhm.
got functional stuff.
Mhm.
You've got uh he changed the name. Is it Make Anything now? Maker
Devin,
Tales.
yeah, yeah.
Oh well, no.
Make Anything is he did Tippy Tree, he did
Oh, let's Make Anything.
yeah.
What's Maker Tales with the multi-board.
Oh,
Um
somebody help us out in the chat. I know what you're talking about. I'm not going to get the name right though.
yeah.
But anyway, yes, lots
Yeah.
of designers, lots of niches as well.
Yeah.
Niches, potato, potato,
Niche.
potato, potato.
Um
So
but I do definitely think that the pie is expanding.
mhm,
Some stuff will get crowded out, of course, but that's just kind of the how life works.
sure.
But I do think that generally, as a type of profession or as a type of work that can be done
Mhm,
and be compensated for, it's getting increasingly accessible, and you can reach a much larger audience because of the accessibility of 3D printing,
mhm.
the need for 3D assets, not just for 3D printing, but for video games and other stuff. Like that's not something that Fangs really focuses on right
Right,
now, but
right.
like I could potentially see a future where like you've got people who make 3D assets for video games and for VR and for whatever else.
Yeah.
Like that's just going to keep expanding over time.
100%.
Um
I mean, I recommend all the time to kids that are learning, like, hey, if you're gonna invest energy in like learning stuff for the future, like CAD is a pretty safe bet, given that you can go so many directions with it. Architecture, game design, cinema, movies, modeling for this, and who knows what else we haven't even thought of, other applications, VR, any of that. So these are very translatable skills to have, and investing in this and finding a way to make money at it now. You may also realize that you get into this and you have no idea where it'll take you.
mhm.
So it's a very growable skill. So it does feel sustainable in the terms of like being a 3D modeler, and the ways that you can make money at that is going to be really. I'm very bearish on that for sure.
Yeah. Was there a aspect of that question I didn't address?
No, I mean, in the overall story of sustainability, this is interesting. I bring it up because I feel like we've been down this road before. We're kind of seeing these platforms in place. Maybe you might equate it to the early days of YouTube, right? Where being a content creator was not a profession back when, I'm old. I remember the before times. Now it's all like kids want to do. It's like they want a YouTube, or they want to be a TikToker, or they want to be, they want that visibility, that brand, stuff out there. And so an economy, a creator economy 1.0, I would say, or I don't know what you call it, but we've seen what happens here, right? So if you were early to the YouTube scene, you very much got the benefit of like the rich get richer. You were featured regularly, and so it's easy to say that, yeah, there can be good money in being a content creator if you got into the game at the right time. So where I'm getting at is like, are we seeing this as a new platform, as a new place where jobs are being created, and it's gangbusters now, it's gold rush, but arguably we're seeing like in YouTube, it's harder and harder to make it as a creator, because like the number of views, like, yeah, maybe that pie is growing, but not at the rate it was at the very beginning, right? Is that a fair analogy? Is that a fair thing to look at as a model for something like this?
I think in a sense, I think that same model applies to pretty much any
Sure.
like knowledge work profession
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Like the number of data, like people working in a particular coding language, or data scientists, or
Absolutely.
every time you see a huge something starts to take off, you see a huge influx in the number of people who want to do it, and then it starts to level off, and then companies have to do layoffs because okay, right now we've got dozens of applicants for any given position.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily unique to this. It's just how intense that's going to be. Like,
Yeah.
is it going to be a huge like spike and then drop? I don't think it will. I think it'll spike a little bit and then level out to something that's actually pretty reasonable, especially because of the versatility of like 3D design. Like it's like like 2D, like 2D design is a special case of 3D design. It's just 3D design that's flat, right?
Yeah.
And like we still have 2D designers who make stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like we're just, as we add dimensions to things,
yeah,
like the pie gets exponentially larger.
Sure. Sure.
So I do think it is. Of course, we're going to see a spike, but I do think this type of design is sustainable, and there will always be aspects of the skill set that will translate well into other things as well, like having a good aesthetic sense or having a good sense for how to just move 3D shapes around in your head can translate to other mechanical things.
Absolutely. And in any, I mean, Britt brings up a great point in the chat. Creatives have to be flexible and adaptive. I would just expand that to just humans should be flexible and adaptive, because like we say, the only thing that's certain in this world is change. And so if you have an ability to ride the waves or identify, especially some of the most successful people are the ones that I think can identify early, you know, these waves and start surfing at the right time. It's not necessarily, you know, a requirement, but the ones that I think have pulled maximum success out of a specific area, like, are oftentimes early to that game. But having that flexibility, being open to that change is so critical in business and life in general, right? My next question for anybody that's listening and realizes you haven't heard Andrew's voice in a while, apparently he had some technical difficulties, so he's in the chat feeding. I wish I could just throw his chat. We could have AI Andrew in his little cell over there. I'm not sure what happened to his internet connection, but the show must go on as always. So now I'm going to get accused of like intentionally boxing him out so I could talk more, right? But that's what the internet does. My next question for you is around the expectation of the community for payment of models or subscription to memberships. That's a newer aspect of what we do. I think in a lot of, you know, just like a lot of other things that we've seen on the internet, like it was born of like the freemium kind of space where we had this expectation that 3D models should be free and ubiquitous and people should just be altruistic about it and put stuff out there. I think we've seen a shift. I don't know if you agree or not. We're starting to see people have an expectation of like paying for stuff, but the quality has also increased. And this is a two-part question because there's a big difference between those that are going to subscribe and pay you via membership versus those that want to do the a la carte menu option.
Yep.
Right. So the first segment is, would you agree that there is a shift in that space, that there's an expectation that people are paying more for these models now and that they should pay for models? So go start with that, and then we'll dive into part two.
So I think it's a really interesting question because a lot of like we're living in a digital world now. We're working with 3D printers. A lot of these have grown out of the open source movement, and like a lot of the beauty and complexity and the advances have been because of open source stuff. And I think that's where a lot of that is originating, like you were saying. But we're also getting to the point where I don't think it's controversial to say that historically, artists who make art should be paid for their art.
Yes.
Like if you had someone like have a bunch of paintings at your local farmer's market, you wouldn't say like, oh, just like take it and walk away with it and be like, oh, it's open source. It's an open source painting. Like,
this is mine now.
This is mine.
And
now
then you go,
because you made it.
This. And yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of value in the open source, like uh, doing things open source, because it helps us grow as a society,
Hmm.
and it helps us learn. But at the same time, the people making these things also need to put food on the table,
Right.
and you can make more complex, more interesting, more intricate things. You can allocate more time to creating things if you actually have the funds to do it, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
there are so many more models. There's so much more beauty that can come into the world when designers are actually getting compensated for the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, a lot of the stuff just wouldn't exist. There would be some baseline of stuff that exists, but it might be functional, or it might like have some needs, but it wouldn't meet every single niche. And we're getting to the point now where we're filling in the gaps, and
Hmm.
we're creating cooler stuff because people are actually willing to pay for models and pay for subscriptions, or pay for subscriptions to sell 3D prints of models.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of different variations on the business model.
There
So I
really
do think
are.
that there's an interesting I think it is a shift in expectations specifically to 3D models, but I don't think it's necessarily a shift in respect to art in general.
Hmm.
And this is just one version of art, or one version of design,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Talk about those different models, if you will, and the merits and drawbacks of each.
as it
Yeah,
like the
as in,
payment or
yeah, payment model. So membership, a la carte,
yeah.
commercial licensing, all that.
So, I mean, starting from I think least compensation to most, like just to test our edge cases, we've got something where it's like, all right, you've got a creator who makes everything for free and posts everything for free, and they
Right.
they essentially get paid in publicity, just because people know their name and
Exposure,
they make
delicious, delicious
exposure,
exposure.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Next step up from that is you have people who are creating things and releasing them for free, but they might have a Patreon or a Buy Me a Coffee or
Mm-hmm.
something else
Mm-hmm.
where they're getting the combination of the payment is in exposure and in people paying what they want
The
for
shareware
whatever.
model for those that
Yep.
remember those old days of software development. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one, and I think that's historically what we've been seeing a lot more of. But now we're kind of moving up that hierarchy of, all right, then we had, okay, you've got individual models that you're putting out, and you can pay for an individual model.
Yeah.
Um, that's cool. You get paid each time someone comes and buys one of your models, but that's not necessarily sustainable recurring. Because let's say I post one model, and it will eventually reach that saturation point where all the people who are going to download that model have downloaded that
Yes. Yeah.
model. So you get that kind of like distinct spike
Right.
in revenue. So it's less sustainable unless you're constantly putting out lots of
Unless you could
individual
keep that
spikes that add up
hype
over
going.
time.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Um, and it's stepping up from that. You've got uh, the membership based ones. So like Patreon, Fangs, subscriptions where people are paying for a monthly subscription to a certain number of models or a certain amount of rights to the models.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting bifurcation where you can
Mm-hmm.
say, all right, um, for this particular amount, you're paying for access to these models that you can print personally, but for this other amount, maybe you're paying for access to take these prints and make money off of them. So
Right.
print them and sell them at your local market or on Etsy or wherever else.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the part where you start to see the revenue of these
Hockey
models kind of
stick. Yeah.
curve like hockey stick
Yep.
upward.
Yep. Yep.
Because personal licenses, all right, you can get a good amount for original content.
Mm-hmm.
Um, also, this varies by type of model as well. Like, because
Yeah.
you might have functional prints or toys or fan art, which you couldn't necessarily monetize at the highest level, but people might be paying you to buy me a coffee for the fan art that you're making. And there's messy IP stuff that I'm not going to touch.
Yeah.
Now.
Oh, that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
That's a whole that's a whole nother dimension that
Mhm.
extends off of this thing. I'm just doing the 2D.
Yeah.
2D.
You just had to go digging
Um,
at the IP thing. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
I didn't say it. I didn't say anything.
Poking the IP bear.
So personal licenses, commercial licenses, and then just stacks on top of that. Commercial license, and you get this other thing, like a D&D stat sheet for the character that you downloaded and you printed. Or maybe you're getting this other. So it's this really interesting curve, like you said, the hockey stick curve. That, like we were saying before, is increasing the amount of utility that we can provide to users by giving more stable, because the more stable you make that revenue for artists and designers, the more interesting and the more complex and the more nuanced they can make the end products, as opposed to well, I'm still working 40 to 80 hours a week doing this other thing, and I'm going to spend my extra time throwing together this thing, and I'm not going to be able to support it. So it's I think that it will even out, not even out eventually. I think that we are going in a good direction, and I'm excited to see what innovations will occur in those business models going forward, because I'm sure there's stuff that we haven't even thought of yet.
Well, and the little thing I was dangling that you all but said is like, hopefully as those things exist and grow, the more the artist starts to believe that this is a sustainable, viable path, right? We're building faith in this new economy that's being created. And so it is very much in the interest of the cults, the things, the systems to show the wins, right? To show the path and say like, no, actually, like, you can focus time and energy on this and get compensated properly for your time. And that is one thing that I haven't seen anybody else, but I don't know if you remember, like when things dropped, the whole like their guide on like how to grow a business on things. And I thought that was incredibly progressive and new. And I would love to see other companies follow suit on that, because we need to be a cheerleader for building faith, and that's what's going to bring new people into the fold, bring new ideas, new innovation, and really get it to latch on. So more of that, please. Okay, we're already just slightly over. I do want though, because I know this is a really interesting thing, and I know there's people that have been following you for a little bit, and even though you're only a year in, I always like to ask what advice you would have for somebody that's getting into this space. So you mentioned all of those different ways that you can make money. What's the strat, to speak in, the young kid things, in terms of like, where do you focus your energy? Does it have to be a little bit of everything? Would you just be like, you know what, just focus on commercial models because that's where the majority of the money is? What do you do?
So what's the 3D modeling meta? All right.
Yeah.
See, there's no one path, right? I think there are things that I would personally do differently if I were starting over, but I do think it depends on what your current state is versus your personal ideal future state.
Yeah.
Like there are different paths to get to that thing. And it depends on if you want to make the type of model you're making. I do think that if you off the bat, like from the beginning, wanted to monetize faster, and make it a more sustainable thing faster, just making stuff.
So consistency, production.
Constantly make a thing, be like, I'm going to make this thing, I'm going to get it out, I'm going to make a new version of the thing, I'm going to get it out, and do that over and over and over. Worry a little bit less about the polish, but just do it. But because it's going to get better each time, and market it. Be like, all right,
okay,
hey, here's this thing. And get that feedback, because you need a good learning loop from your users.
So we need the reps. We need the reps, but you need, and I think this is where a lot of people struggle, because we don't all have a Felicia Day to hawk our stuff for us, my man.
Yeah, it's true.
But kudos again to Things for recognizing that there's some really good partnership opportunities there, that there are some ways that you can market and utilize people that are known for those things. So that's just another great green flag that I think we see on a platform like that, for helping you shout above the noise when there are more and more people every day that want to be featured, that might have really great stuff, but are just too new to start to rank the way that maybe somebody like you that's been around longer has.
I do want to clarify though, this is on Felicia's plan. It's not on my plan. I just get credit as
You get
a
exposure.
designer of it. I get exposure. Well, I mean, yeah, there are other collaboration details involved there. But it's not like I've got Felicia coming out and for each individual Mimetics model being like, this is
No, I'm glad you
yeah,
say that.
it's a different thing.
I'm glad
It's inherently a different thing. But
it's good relationship building. It's good visibility
yes.
for you, and it does come back. And honestly, the next time, Felicia's got a good idea for something and she needs somebody to help implement, like, who's the first person she calls, right? It's like,
Exactly.
that's great.
So I do like what you said there about the relationship building.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing I'm coming at this from a slightly different direction of I didn't come in thinking like, all right, I want to monetize this right off the bat. I want this to be a sustainable business from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I came into it being like, I want to make some models and see what happens, and I want to experiment and make cool stuff that I enjoy.
Okay.
And then it started growing from there, and I'm finding the balance. If I purely was like, all right, I want to maximize the amount of money that I'm making right now,
Yeah.
I would just be churning. I would look out there and see, okay, this week people are liking this type of model. I'm going to make that. I'm going to polish it. I'm going to send it. I'm going to do that over and over. I'm going to be constantly in contact on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all these other things to just grow the learning loop for the business, as opposed to right now I'm focusing more on the R&D underlying the business.
Okay.
And I'm currently in the process of turning that to the appropriate balance between those two extremes, between just sales and just putting out the stuff, and all right, this is the core of what makes my brand my brand. And finding the right balance where it's still true to the brand, but still tightening up that shipping more often, solidifying those learning loops, building those relationships, doing more marketing and sales and relationship building and collaborations. If you wanted to maximize income from the beginning, I would focus on just make something simple and then improve it a little bit each time and post about it, get feedback on it. Any users that you get, respond to that feedback and just like polish it for them. Give those first few users the best possible experience with the things that you're giving them. And then organically that will grow out as you're making stuff for them.
So am I to take that to mean that you recommend of those monetization paths, like doing a membership style thing? Because you're talking about like providing for your members, not necessarily the a la carte or just the freemium model.
Oh, I think that the membership model is the most sustainable. If we're talking about sustainability, it's hands down the most sustainable. The freemium, there is a mix. So, for example, I release a lot of models on things free for a while, and then they kind of go into the vault of access for members only. That's evolving into I'm going to change the percentage of models that are free to versus the percentage of models that come out exclusively as paid or membership, because if I'm doing I can release a lot of free models that maybe I can do that quicker iteration with because I have to put less time into the model. Whereas if there's something that takes more time, I might be all right, this is a member exclusive, thank you for being with me, you get this cooler, more thought out, more detailed thing. Whereas I'm doing a little bit more of the exploration with the free stuff. So I think that optimizing for the business isn't necessarily picking one. I'm only going to release models under the membership, or I'm only going to release free and ask people to buy me a coffee.
Yeah,
I think that there's a appropriate balance where you maybe put most of your stuff under a membership and some stuff for free just to gain the exposure or get the feedback, which honestly I think is the more important thing.
The feedback
is getting that feedback from people who might not have otherwise purchased. Anyway, I'm ranting now.
No. It's I think what's interesting about the membership model, and I've said this in the past too, because we've seen people on Patreon for a long time now, and honestly, Patreon was meant to be like an all encapsulating membership model for like everything, right? It wasn't really intended And in fact, that's one of the biggest criticisms they get is it's just like the file management is not ideal for somebody that's doing digital files a lot of the time. But for people that want to like support a podcast or whatever other thing, Patreon has become a big part of people's income. And really, if you stop and think about it, it's a manifestation of a long known business practice where repeat customers are the best customers, right? That you're going to spend a lot less resources trying to drum up new business, keeping old customers than finding new ones, right? And so the membership model, I think, is really an extension of that, right? Where you're just trying to retain a loyal following and getting the maximum value out of that. And it's got to be a tricky line to walk too, because you're going to have to accept the fact people are going to come and go. But I'm sure you have access to the analytics and you can see that it's, I think people that support you in that way, are probably more happy to do so than we might expect. There's going to always be, would you say there's always those that are in it for the models, and then there are those that are in it because they want to see Mimetic succeed and like just be a part of that support structure?
Hands down. Yeah. There's always going to be a distribution there.
Sure.
Or people will subscribe, download models, and then immediately hop off. But then there are people who will subscribe and stick around, and even if they don't want the models this month, or even if they're not using their commercial license, they just want to stick around because they want to be supportive and they want to stick around for the future, sort of thing. So I think the community building is a huge aspect, and something that in this month and in the coming months, I'm going to be putting a much larger focus on kind of diving in, being more present with the community. I want to do more like streams. It's something I wanted to start doing a few months back, except all of the time I was putting into the Felicia Day models, I was like, I can't really stream this because this isn't my model. This is Felicia's model. I can't do a live stream of me. So I'm going to try to figure out all that stuff, be more present as a virtual presence, both like on screen, on X and Instagram and Discord, because really like it's the community that's the important thing. And I feel like I've reached the point where I've done all the not all the R&D I could ever want to do, but I did a lot of the R&D and the exploration that I wanted to do starting out. And now I feel like I have a strong enough foundation that I can jump back in and reallocate a lot of the resources and time that I was putting into just hitting my head against the wall in Blender. I can take some of that time and spend it going back into the community, which I'm really excited about, because honestly, and I want to get out and I want to get to like local farmers markets and to conventions where people want new models, so I can get out there and talk to them in person, because that gives me a lot of energy.
Man, I
want to do a lot more of that.
I'm so there with you, and I've said that for a while now too, because to me, I find it incredibly energizing, right? Like it actually is really good for keeping that drive up to interact with your customer base. And honestly, I think it's a great way to double or triple dip on stuff that you're already spending time to do. I love streaming. It's like, hey, I've got to do this build anyway. I may as well set up the camera. But a lot of times it's just like, it's like midnight and I'm not feeling like I want to be on, or it's like there's a million excuses not to do it. So I think it just has to do, you need to integrate it into your strategy for sustainability, where it's just like pick a time and be consistent and do those reps. And why not, right? Because I think for a lot of people, the membership too, it's like that access. Like how many people love the behind the scenes things and to be able to ask you questions and all of that. I mean, like that's just really powerful. The other thing about the membership model that's great too, or I love the 1-2 punch of the freemium with the membership, right? Where it's like you've got a good promotional vehicle to drive people to the membership thing, but that you can still be accessible to people that maybe can't afford the membership or don't want to pay it or aren't quite sure yet. And there are ways to do that doesn't create a lot of extra work, right? Like you had to build that model already, maybe you give the smaller version, as a freemium, and be like, oh, by the way, and if you want to do the big version that you can make yourself and sell, be part of the membership and then be part of the, commercial licensing tier.
Mhm.
And that's a great way to try before you buy, as people in the chat are saying. And, lots of great strategies around there that maybe seem obvious, but because we don't spend the time that you're saying, like, to kind of think about what are the mechanics of this, setting up the strategy, setting up the because a big part of it, it's not just the R&D, it's not just the design, there's a marketing strategy around it. I mean, if this is really a business, you have to cover a lot of ground and
Yep.
do it, not just covering all those bases, but doing it in a way that doesn't burn you out, right?
Mhm.
So do you feel like you've dipped your toe in? I mean, you're talking about doing like layering on new things, but you got to be careful that it doesn't feel too overwhelming, too much, too quickly, too, right?
Yes. So I think what I'm kind of getting at there is we talked about earlier about building out process and workflow and systems,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of the place that my brain tries to start, and then I shoot myself in the foot a little bit because I'm just not getting stuff out.
Right.
But I've kind of ridden that wave a little bit to the point where I have a certain amount of process that I have established where I can create certain types of models a lot more sustainably.
Mm-hmm.
Others that are more experimental still take a lot of time. But if I shift uh, my diet of experimental versus stuff that I can sustainably produce, that
Mm-hmm.
gives me a lot more time to spend.
Definitely.
Well, like getting over that initial activation energy, that initial hump of
Yeah.
I don't know how to stream, I don't know how to use Twitter, I don't know or X, I don't know how to use any of these things.
Twitter is fine. We don't have
I
to
never
call it
I
X.
didn't even make myself
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
Facebook. Like I never used Facebook. I had friends who made a Facebook of me and I eventually inherited it. I have not been I'm not a very good internet presence person. So this is a huge learning curve for me.
Yeah.
Um, that it's just taken a lot of time. And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, all right, within this next month, I can spend a lot. I can actually come up with a few more models that I've got ready to release, and I can put in that time to get over that activation energy and establish that new habit of
Mm-hmm.
posting more often, being more present, chatting more often, getting out and having good conversations with the community that really are the end goal. That it just felt like I didn't have it felt like I hadn't put in the work to get there yet. And now it feels like I've put in the R&D work in my own mental model,
Yeah.
my own like set of biases and preconceptions
Yeah.
of like, all right, I need to put in this initial technical hours grinding on making whatever I want to grind at before I can get out and sell it, which isn't the best business strategy, but it's something that was ingrained in me that I'm trying to correct now.
The alternative is, like, I don't know how much you read like Entrepreneurial Life, but like the flip side of that coin is like the Tim Ferriss model, where it's like you're selling before you have anything, which I think to a
Mhm.
lot of makers just feels really smarmy and gross, because it's like we don't want to misrepresent, the value proposition. Um, I think you're doing it right on. But you mentioned earlier, if you were to start now, you would do it differently. So what would you do differently if you were going to start now?
Um, I think if I were to do it differently, and again, like I say this, but I don't know how it would turn out, right?
Mm.
If I were to do it differently, I would have just started making whatever
Mm.
simple stuff. I love that I did the snap flex thing. And I want to do more with that. I love that I did the things that move in interesting ways.
Mm.
But it was just a lot of upfront work that didn't have immediate feedback. Just because I couldn't produce it fast enough in a way that I was comfortable releasing it.
Mm.
So really, maybe still do that sort of thing, but decrease it to a much smaller percentage of time allocated to R&D.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I'm spending more time just being like, all right, I'm gonna make a turkey, I'm gonna make a dragon, I'm gonna make a skeleton, I'm gonna make a and just make stuff that's simpler.
Mm.
But that by the nature of doing it, I'm just gonna polish it more over time.
Hmm.
There are a lot of folks that have uh, come in and I don't know if that's fair to say. I've seen designers that immediately responded to the Cinderwing Flexi Factory Matt Meyer makes thing, kind of copying the business model with their own
with their own take.
It started out very similar
Mm.
um in the designs, but they've leveled out to having their own style, and they do decently well on other platforms.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um I'm not sure I would. I'm not saying start out and just copy someone else, because that's not the intent. But
Yeah.
like you can look out and take inspiration and be like, all right, this is a type of thing that will do well. I'm just going to do my version of it
Mhm.
50 times.
Mhm.
It's going to get better each time. I'm going to get feedback from the community each time.
Yeah.
I think I would not to the I wouldn't just copy other people's stuff, but I would be a little less cautious. Like, it was a year and a half before I even made a dragon, from the
Mm.
time that I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I want to get into 3D modeling," because I was like, "Oh no, I don't want to step on anyone's toes." Because like MacGyver made that dragon, and Cinderwing's whole thing is dragons, and
I mean,
I
it's
don't even want to get close to that. So I spent a year and a half before I even like made a thing,
yeah.
which I could have just been making them and not putting them out there, and like doing it for myself.
Mhm.
So I think I've been a little overly cautious when it comes to the uh, staying away from other people's turf.
Mm.
Where in reality, like, we all have our own niches and our own styles of things,
Mhm.
and it's good to be respectful, but also like you can do a similar-ish thing without copying.
Yeah, I
Um,
think. I mean, we talk about the. I've talked about this with a lot of content creators. Like, at some point, you do need to find your own voice, but I think
yeah.
we do start with mimicry of that which is successful as a potential starting point, because it feels like safe waters. It's familiar, and then you find your way to put your own take, spin, voice on it, and so that's interesting. You mentioned the desire to get your stuff more visible and to interact more. You know, doing more streaming, maybe more social media posting. Um, are you concerned by how consumptive that can be? Because you get drawn into that world, and you know, in a lot of ways, it kind of feeds some ego. I'm not saying you're an egotistical individual, but like the reasons that people get those dopamine hits from those things, right, is because you're getting that feedback, that positive. You get the likes, the comments, and all that stuff, and before you know it, that's all you're doing. And so that's a dangerous road to go down. One I've experienced myself, where it's like I'm probably spending too much time on here sometimes, but it's been very, you know, for as toxic and crazy as a lot of people blame social media for, like, I've made a lot of great relationships, gotten a lot of really good feedback there. It really does feel like where the rubber meets the road of like just raw, unadulterated feedback,
Mhm.
like it or hate it.
Yep.
What's it sounds like you're optimistic about it. Have you kind of planned anything out exactly yet?
I'm optimistic. I've drafted out general, not very specific, but general guidelines for, okay, this is how much time I should spend in a week engaging with certain things. Because,
Mm,
like anything, it's about having a balanced diet.
yeah,
If you do too much of any one thing, it's going to go
it's not
poorly.
good for you. Yeah, yeah.
So if I spent every waking hour checking Instagram and just doom scrolling, that'd be a bad thing. But maybe I should plan to be like, all right, I can spend a few minutes a day looking to interact and chat with people and get good feedback and post something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a way to balance it. I am terrified of it, but I do need to do it,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm planning on doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The hands down, the hardest part of this whole thing for me is just having any internet presence at all.
Mm.
I is it is I don't think terrifying is the right word, but it's very intimidating.
What?
Just because
Why is
I
that?
never did I just never did the internet thing.
Hmm.
I always had I didn't always had, but I had a dumb phone for a long time. Like, I didn't do the phone thing for a while. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do Facebook. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really do instant messenger stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't even really talk on the phone or text much. My friends just kind of know that they need to find me in person and like grab me and then chat with me there,
Yeah.
just because something I don't think I trained myself to learn how to interact in the electronic world, the digital world, very well. When a lot of people were like learning it organically. I was like, I don't need to do that. Like that's bad for me. So I didn't organically learn how to develop the appropriate responses to like the appropriate like diet of this is the amount I should consume, and this is how tone works via text, and this is how lots of just little soft skill things in the digital world
Mm-hmm.
I know I don't get a concept of, and I've just avoided them because I've been afraid of diving in and then overstepping or like making
Hmm.
a faux pas or whatever. So it's just been very, very intimidating for me because
Interesting.
I'm happy like throw me into a convention of 80,000 people and I'll walk around and I'll chat with whoever.
Yeah, you're a very
Throw
social
me
individual.
throw
Sure.
me
Yeah.
on thank you.
Yeah.
Throw me onto like a chat board or something and I don't know what to say.
Well, to be fair,
Like,
there are somewhat different muscles to flex too. It's,
yeah,
just being kind of talking in front of a camera versus like carrying out a conversation with a human are different things. I think the good news for you though is that of all the things to have to learn or to layer on, like that's probably one of the like easier ones to dip into. I would hope for you. So that's
hope so.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to seeing more of it and being on there. I think my fear with a lot of it is like if I open those floodgates, like I have Discord, but I'm not on there a lot. And people are like, why doesn't Repkord or, why don't you, have a Discord for these things? And I'm like, because I would be on there all the time. Like, I have to limit the temptation, honestly, of a
Yeah.
lot of that. And it's the same thing kind of with streaming. Even though I enjoy it quite a bit, and there's ways to, hey, I've already got to do this too, but it takes some time to set it up and get it going and all that stuff too. Reconfigure. My streaming area is also my kitchen, so it's like it's got to be clean enough. There's too many reasons to not do it sometimes. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
It can apply for any platform, right? Because
yeah.
you've got Discord and streaming, and I realized a while back, like even just going on and checking the Fangs leaderboard, I had
Mhm.
started doing months and months ago. I'd started doing that obsessively, and I was like, no, that's bad.
Right.
Don't do that. Like,
Anything obsessively is bad, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Well, balance, guardrails, these are all good pieces of advice for people. I think it's easier said than done. One of the things I want to end on here that's interesting in this vein, Piled 3D Printing has a comment. He said it's harder than he expected to actually gain an internet presence. And I think that's a common thought, right? Because we see just things all the time go viral and people seem to build a following, but even if you do have something that gains a following quickly, I would argue that that's somewhat artificial. Like that's like you might get your 15 minutes of fame, but the long slow burn is more sustainable presence and stuff like that too. So it's like it doesn't do you any good to build up a following of 20,000 people if like they just like followed you and then moved on to something else.
yeah,
Which is why I think that arguably the for marketing and stuff now, like subscriber numbers actually matter less because there are so many just like vacant subscribe, like there's a subscription there but there's nobody behind it anymore. So we've gotten into a very like what have you done for me lately type world where you got to keep the hits coming and maintain some visibility and some presence and stuff like that. And so having good strategies for just like consistency, putting a plan together, I say pay better dividends than trying to, get that banger out there that's going to be the next viral sensation, because you're going to
yeah.
always be chasing that lightning in a bottle,
Mhm.
if you don't take that approach. But anyway, we could go on forever. I'm just
Yeah.
going to change. Apparently now this podcast is now a 90-minute podcast, and then we'll probably do 2 hours. But I just enjoy it way too much. I mean, this is always the
It's a great
podcast.
time.
It's been a passion project for a long time. Like I know that I'm like way behind on like putting a bunch of stuff like out on the actual pod platform and doing promo. But to me, the value of it is meeting great people, having good conversations, getting to engage a little bit. So there's a lot of value in things, even if there's not like a financial motivation. So I encourage people to carve out time for those passions as well. And I appreciate you, Thomas, being here and sharing your process for that as well, because I think it's
you.
healthy. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon. You
Yeah.
gonna be planning to be on any events in the near future? Will we see you at what's the next one? Printopia, I guess. East
Printopia?
Coast. That's on your coast.
I believe I have it on my calendar. I'm gonna double check really quickly
End of
to make sure.
September coming up, man.
Into September. Yeah, I think I'm good for that one. I think I've got the
We'll come
time
by for a day,
allocated.
say hi,
I'm excited for that.
shake some hands, talk to some people. Since you're hard to
Yeah.
find online, we need to see you in person.
I'm gonna try to be more present online. It's good. This is great. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man.
This is a ton of fun. And it's just I'm really excited to be
Well,
here. I've really enjoyed this.
The pleasure has been all mine, and I genuinely wish you just nothing but success. Like, please keep doing what you're doing. Please keep inspiring other generations and newer people that are into it. Like, that it's warm waters. There's lots of opportunity. There's plenty of room for everybody. Be that cheerleader, and keep cranking out those great models, man. I can't wait to see what's up next. Can you tease us with anything that you're working on?
Ooh, I don't know what would be. Since I did just come from a board gaming convention, I've got a bunch of models lined up that are still in the works that are more tabletop board game oriented. So, not necessarily, but think along the lines of accessories for tabletop stuff that move in an interesting way, or dice towers that move in an interesting way.
Awesome.
That sort of stuff that still need a little bit of polishing. There's going to be a lot of other simpler stuff that comes in the meantime, but I've got some other things I am excited for.
That's awesome. Well, we look forward to that. If you are not following Thomas, please go give him a follow. He's Mimetics3D on pretty much everything, right? And then go check out his thanks page. If you want to see some of his designs, he's got plenty of free stuff up there, as well as, lots of really valuable stuff behind the membership. So consider giving him a little sub there. And we appreciate all your contributions, my friend, to the community. And be well. Everyone, if you're still with us, thank you so much. I wish you the happiest of weekends. And we will catch you on the next episode of Maker That Money. I believe next Friday. My calendar guy fell off a couple hours ago, so I'll check in with him. But watch the Twitter feed for the latest announcement on that, and we'll let you know when we're at. So until then, you guys have been awesome. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
You stay right there. Let's see here. We're going to